Hello everyone, I'm Chris the Archaeologist, and since the new Tomb Raider 1 to 3 Remastered just came out, I thought I'd identify some of the real-life archaeological artifacts and features in the original and the Anniversary remake from over a decade ago now, 2 decades ago now. It's for fellow fans, nice to actually get new Tomb Raider stuff, and maybe I'll talk more about the individual ones some other time, because there are lots to go through, and a lot of this actually isn't Peruvian. As a Peruvian specialist and an Indianist, this some of this kind of gets me. It's, even though I've started playing Tomb Raider long before, so yeah, it's kind of learning. It's like a scientist that starts learning about physics and then goes and watch Star Wars and can sometimes be glaring. But sometimes you just kick back and enjoy it. But you're just actual real world artifacts and features, architecture, art. Might be interesting if you want to actually know what the origins of them are, and also if you want to maybe one day go and visit places like Peru or Bolivia, Mexico. So let's begin with the first level. So quote unquote Peru, where Lara enters the mountain caves in the fictionalized version of an actual ancient city called Vilcabamba. Yeah. And unfortunately, at the start, it's already immediately clear it's not quite Peruvian. If you see at the top of this gate, there are several different designs. Some of them, a couple of them are Andean broadly, but only one thing there is really Peruvian. So another image again of it. This time I tried to pull it from the remaster, but even then with the remaster, it doesn't. Not everything shows up. It's a little blurry. But so in the middle, you have something that's Mayan, flanked by two images of the same statue that are actually from Bolivia, and at the bottom you have a few Mayan glyphs, except for the second from the last. That one is Peruvian, and I'll explain which one's what. Now, the image in the middle is actually a Mayan architectural mask fragment from a site called Placeres in Mexico, and dates to the early Classic period. And so I won't really go into too much of the chronology of it, just because there's so much to cover and not really, really enough time to go through each and every context, and also to write the scripts for it just yet. But I might go back later on these individual artifacts or architectural features or art. On the sides here, though, next to the architectural mask is one Andean statue, a low-res version of the Tiwanaku staff deity from the Portal of the Sun at the city of Tiwanaku. And the staff deity will also be another major theme in both this level and also Tomb Raider Legend and Tomb Raider Anniversary. On the right, at the bottom of are mostly Mayan glyphs, except for one that is possibly a little bit more Andean. It's a Chimu bird, designed from Chan Chan, which is the capital of the Chimu Empire in the north coastal area of Peru, south of Ecuador, north of Lima, and west of the Andean highlands. So not Inca either, pre-Inca roughly, and also somewhat contemporaneous with the Inca, because the Chimu were the largest rivals to the Inca Empire before they were incorporated. So in the loading screen, you actually have a kind of modified version of that Mayan architectural mask as well. Uh, don't know if it draws from something else, but certainly doesn't seem to be based off the original model. And then as you move into the initial sections of the mountain cave, you see these switches. They aren't really quite anything per se, at least not ones I could clearly identify. You can see that they're a little bit more cartoonish than the other examples, and just few possible inspirations I could find. Mostly, again, well, not mostly, all of them are from Mesoamerica. Of course, as you go through the level, you'll start to actually see one very famous image, the Aztec Sunstone. That was technically actually post-classic uh, Mexica or Aztec, found in the Zocalo, which is the currently a large plaza in Mexico City, formerly the capital known as Tenochtitlan. And you can see actually the remastered version tries to be a little bit more accurate. You can see a little bit of the details closer to the originals. And you can see this in the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City. So this one is actually probably one of the most exciting ones for me. It's the Tenon head from Shavin the Wantar, and it comes from a very early Andean site in Peru that was thought to be in many ways the mother culture of sorts to many of the later developments across the Andes. And this fanged face, it could be referred to a deity. It could also, and there is a large fanged deity sculpture in the subterranean tunnels of this temple. But this tenon head in particular is on the outside of one of the temples, um, and it could also uh, be representations of not necessarily just supernatural beings. It could be people who've gone through a ritual experience after having taken San Pedro cactus, and sometimes they're portrayed as turning into these somewhat fanged, wide-eyed figures. This one was actually a shot in the dark. I only found I actually managed to reverse Google search this one. And this is an Aztec bas-relief of the goddess of the earth's waters from Tenochtitlan, again, the capital of the Aztec Empire. Okay, so these are also probably very familiar if you've ever read anything about Mesoamerica. Again, not Peruvian, but very cool. Are these Mesoamerican skull racks. So you have two examples in the actual game. You have one example from the Templo Mayor in Tenochtitlan. It's an Aztec. This is an Aztec feature, and then you have another one from Chichen Itza, which is a Mayan example of these skulls, but in side profile. Some planeware vessels. Unfortunately, I'm not as familiar with those, though I really should be getting to know them for my dissertation. Anyways, though, I don't know if these are actually Andean. One of them, the tripod there on the left, I could probably talk about that to some extent, but not really of interest to anyone here, I don't think. Okay, so in the skull rack room, you actually see one of the artifacts that Lara can pick up, and that is actually an image of what's known as the Lambayeque deity. From the Lambayeque culture, also in the north coastal region just south of Ecuador, and this community was actually conquered by the Chimu Empire, and it is seems to be drawn from the top of this Tumi knife. So a Tumi knife is a sacrificial knife, so you would use that for decapitation, and you do see some supernatural figures, and also, uh, of course, humans who would decapitate sacrificial victims using these types of knives. This is honestly more ornamental, but yeah, very provoking, evocative image. Okay, this one's a Moche fine line stirrup vessel. So these ones are very much again in this one is especially in my wheelhouse. And I actually have a few replicas of these. And so these are essentially very uniquely spouted vessels. So you have this curve in the center with the top spout, and in the center it's a globular vessel, often very highly decorated. It can have warriors on them. They could have entire narrative scenes of sacrifices, of burials, of warriors battling one another, of lima beans uh, who who are human-like anthropomorphic warriors that fight deer. She might do a video on these sometime later if there's an interest. So these are also another very popular image that you might be familiar with if you've seen other, again, anything Mesoamerica tends to use these. So these are Toltec warrior statues from Tula, and you may have seen them. Uh, actually don't know quite a few examples right now that come to mind, but definitely, as you can see, Tomb Raider, I believe Legend might also reuse some of these figures, but there's a certain irony to that, and it's that these types of statues are sometimes thought of as quote-unquote Atlantean statues, but not because they're associated with the mystical, pseudoscientific idea of Atlantis, but somewhat more so because they're associated with Atlas or the Atlanti figures in European sculpted pillars. So Atlantean as in Atlas, the Greek figure that holds up the earth. So fun pun from the developers nonetheless. Okay, so these fanged figures, face designs also come from the Moche culture, so ancestral to Some of the cultures I mentioned, Lambaeke and the Chimu. Uh, again, one of my primary areas of research, and these fanged face has actually come from a site called Huac de la Luna in Peru. Though it's all some of these designs, at least one of them, are also found at another site called Huacacao Viejo, where a priestess was found with kind of completely covered in gold ornaments, and you can actually visit um, both the temple and the museum that's right next to it, if you're interested. That said, in the remastered edition, they changed some of the Moche Fanged deity images to this mask of Tlaloc from Teotihuacan. But so it's not Peruvian now. Now it's changed into another Mesoamerican image, but it does fit that Tlaloc imagery that seems to be pervasive in this level. So the developers, and I guess Aspire now, has been keeping to a theme, even if it's not quite Indian. And then as you go outside and you fight the T-Rex, you actually see this odd sculpture with its tongue sticking out, and it's actually again not Peruvian, but um, it is a Mayan. Comes from a Mayan incense burner, so it depicts the Sun Lord. It's around late Classic Maya and comes from the Walters Art Museum. I have seen similar designs of the same deity on other objects as well, but this is probably the closest one that I could find. And this one really got me initially because I thought that it was a Maya painting from the color, but the iconography actually comes from the stone of Tizoc. So it's a large Aztec disc-shaped stone that was found at the Zocalo, the plaza in Mexico City today, and formerly again Tenochtitlan, and it depicts a warrior grabbing the hair of another warrior, and there's some debate over its exact usage, maybe calendrical, maybe related to ritual battle. If you look it up, some very interesting things. Maybe I'll do a video on some of these stones as well. Again, let me know in the comments if you're interested in any specific ones. It might take a while for me to get around to that, but it'd be fun to see what everyone's interested in. That said, ironically, the Moche of Peru did also have similar iconography of warriors grabbing and holding each other's hair and kind of dragging them and fighting, also images of sacrifice. So it's an interesting choice again to go with the Aztec stuff, but I guess, especially since they've already used Moche iconography elsewhere throughout this level, and I'm actually quite amazed that they used Moche iconography. But that was a big kind of hot trend back in the 90s because the tombs of many different Moche lords and priestesses were found about the 90s, early 2000s as well. Well, I guess late 80s to be specific. Not that not that it matters, but yeah, just my professional research academic focus is getting in the way again. So this is the next one. This one is the Aztec Maze Goddess. An exact version this is based on is unclear to me, but it's very much like the smaller figure from the Denver Art Museum. And you can see her massive headdress with these kind of floral rosette designs, and she's holding cobs of maize. So finally, we get to the actual tomb, I guess, tomb chamber of Qualopec, the fictionalized Atlantean god that is, I suppose, sitting in this throne. And you see all the same designs that I mentioned before. This design of the Stone of Tizoc, the Toltec Tula statues, uh, the Lambaeke Sikan deity, sometimes also found in Chimu iconography. Uh, and you see the images of the uh, Tlaloc mask in the background upside down for some reason, the Mayan glyphs, the very stylized versions of Mayan glyphs, and also maybe the Chimu bird in the back. Uh, so, and two very more Egyptian looking mummies flank the Qualopec himself. So yeah, that's about it for the Tomb Raider Remastered and the original version, and I'm going to move on to the next one, which is now. So now let's not move on to the anniversary remake from 2007. I mentioned 10 years ago. Oh my God, it's been so long. I never always forgets how long ago some of these are. And immediately things are much more Andean this time. So even though most people have focused on how, um, let's say, Thor in the St. Francis Folly level was changed to Hephaestus to better reflect the kind of Greek theme of it rather than having a mix of different gods from different cultures. They also did have somewhat of a dedicated attempt to change it up here in the anniversary edition. And we could already identify some of these. I've already mentioned them. You have in the center, now you have the Lambaeke deity, though there's some overlap because the Chimu also had a similar figure um, on their iconography, partly because they're in the same region, and they conquered the Lambaeke. You also have uh, these Viracocha figures, so this is more of the Inca version of the staff deity from that you saw in the earlier Tiwanaku. And Viracocha will come up again in Tomb Raider Legend, in the Bolivian level especially. Uh, and, and more or less the sun god, the major deity of the Inca. And then you have this sort of fang. You have the Mayan glyphs, like quasi Mayan glyphs there, and then you have at the bottom you have this big fanged face with these stylized snake or snake dragons coming out of the tops of its eyes, almost like its eyebrows, I guess. This one, I guess, vaguely could be Andean, vaguely Mesoamerican. There are kind of snake imagery and fanged jaguar-like imagery, but this one also kind of strikes me a little. It kind of has somewhat kind of Asian artistic vibes to it as well. So, you know, I wouldn't quite place it as entirely Indian or Mesoamerican. Now this trap here, I don't quite know. It does look like the statue of this female deity here, but that's kind of making a leap in kind of guessing it as well. If you do know, please let me know. I'll probably update the video, and after, if anybody's has any corrections, I'll probably make a second follow-up to this. And as for the dart shooters on the right, it's generally, I guess you could say, generally Mesoamerican. Uh, wouldn't place it as anything specific because again, this is a little bit more of a simplified cartoon version of it. This one also confuses me a bit to some extent. It looks like a little at the top here, like the Tlaloc heads. These are Tenon heads at the temple of the feathered serpent in Teotihuacan. So not to be confused with Tenochtitlan. This is also in Mexico, but it's a different city site. Um, and Tlaloc was the rain deity. And but at the same time, the rest of it doesn't really fit. It actually looks like a slightly different statue that we'll actually cover here. So it looks like a blend of them, and I'll show you what I mean. But before that, this kind of these pillars also appear. It's definitely riffing on Mayan architecture, though it's not really a real type of pillar that you'd expect in the Mayan world per se. And it's like a broadly Mayan architectural styles being placed into this kind of pillar. Not quite accurate, I would say, but kind of does reflect that. Similarly here, you also see another fictional hybrid version between, I guess, Andean and Mesoamerican fanged imagery, and this can't really, I'm not sure what to make of it, but it does broadly seem to be inspired by, somewhat inspired by this gilded copper moche headdress from a site known as Lamina. It's actually was a heavily looted site because there was a mine near it, and yeah, anyways, so this is, I think, based off of that spike. So if you look at the face in actual game, you see those curved points on the side of the mouth, and also right underneath the what do you call the sliding bit on the door that covers it. I'm embarrassed as an archaeologist, but you also see those points. Those seem. I guess this is supposed to be a representation of the fictional Qualopec, who's kind of like this spider-like guy with these spikes to help him uh, walk around. So I think, well, I guess it's his legs, but yeah. So I think it's supposed to be that, and actually that'll come up at the end because the Qualopec chamber uses moche iconography and this kind of fanged imagery as well to kind of equate this fanged figure with with Qualopec. But again, going into too many details. Okay, so on top of the gate though is also another Viracocha image, again Inca version. And again, in the same room as Laura swings across these rails, you also see a combination of the sunstone, the Aztec sunstone, or at least inspired by it, and then you also see the Bolivian staff deity from Tiwanaku, and also the more Inca Viracocha figure. So yeah, so as you can see, this is sort of the one I mentioned that you saw earlier. That was mixed with a Tlaloc head imagery. This is maybe supposed to be riffing off the statue of Koliku, and but instead the developers seem to just turn their quasi-Mayan pyramid, pseudo-Mayan pyramid, sorry, Mayan pillars, and turned it into this general form. So in the equivalent to the skull rack room, they've actually changed it in the anniversary edition with a remake with these vaguely spiked fence, sort of spiked, yeah, spiked fences with these heads on spikes, and it really doesn't. I don't think it really adds anything, and it really isn't any more Andean. I think that the rooms themselves are maybe try to look more Indian, but yeah, these ones I suppose they're supposed to be mummified skulls or something like that. But anyways, just I can't, I'm not sure where they were going with this one. I guess they just didn't want to. I don't know. This choice confounds me because if you're gonna go and mix up Andean Mesoamerican stuff, the Mesoamerican skull racks I think are much cooler. And you have this. We have the Mayan chalk or the rain god architectural masks, which fit the theme of the Tlaloc-like heads. Also, that one's more of Teotihuacan, Aztec deity. That's roughly the equivalent. But it also vaguely looks like the Andean moche fang figures that I mentioned earlier. Here are a couple of examples from Uxmal and also from uh, Xlapac. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And they actually changed up this room, so we saw this room a little earlier already. But yeah, it looks like they changed up the moche fanged faces and also the Toltec Tula Atlantes statues with these kind of much more robotic looking faces, I guess to make it fit more in the in-universe version of Atlantis that they're trying to show. And then you actually have some variation of the sort of the staff deity, but also staff deity equivalents that you find elsewhere. So this one I couldn't quite place the exact culture, even though it is very familiar. It could even be, uh, it, it's probably Lambaeke, Chimu, or within the continuum of the North Coast, as far as it seems to be aware to me. As soon as I'm aware of. The closest one example I've found is this Chimu Gold Rattle from the Art Institute of Chicago, but there's probably another equivalent, but just didn't have enough time to search it up between doing actual research, and teaching and doing this video, so apologies if I do figure it out. I'll do a follow-up video on that one. On the left, in between these two staff deity-like figures, you also see, I think, what is supposed to be the equivalent of this Skion, but in the same style, essentially. And also, just one more note in terms of this staff deity looking figure. So you can actually see they're not necessarily holding a staff. It looks more like they're holding a snake on one hand, maybe a crop on the other one. That's also sometimes seen. So in the other room, we actually saw that they changed up the Moche Fang reliefs to something that looks more robotic, like the fictional Atlantis in the game. But you also see actually much more accurate Moche Fang reliefs from Waka de la Luna, again, but with much greater fidelity. It's very fairly accurate in comparison to the Tomb Raider 1 versions. We also have a side profile on the left-hand image of some sort of fanged figure, a side profile with kind of a paw. I couldn't really figure out which one this is. The closest ones I could find is this Aztec day sign for a dog from the Codex Laud, I believe, and the other is Sculpture 34 from the site of Shipping the Huantar in Peru. And then these ones again, this one, I'm not quite sure. I think it's just vaguely supposed to be thematic or in theme. These kind of look like could be caimans, maybe, in which case it would fit within the Andes region, but it could be alligators, crocodiles. I'm not quite sure. And this one was a bit of a when you go out in the anniversary edition, you fight the T-Rex. You see these statues, and I thought it was a bit of a long shot in the dark, as it looked kind of like those more simplified kind of cartoon versions of statues. But it turns out it does seem like it could fit this monolith from Teotihuacan, and then you also see some of them as well as you move into the next room after the T-Rex hits the part of the building. And then in the main kind of gear area where you're trying to lift up the dam to flood the area, you actually see a few images on top of the actual face. Here you actually see again a bit of Viracocha, again, as well as what's known as the Raimondi stele. So this is an image of a similar fanged like staff deity at the site of Shimmin the Wantar, and you can see the faces go back. They go in one direction, but they go in opposite directions. So if you flip the image, you also see a bunch of faces on the other side, flipped over. And then finally, I don't really know what that one is at the bottom. It's a bird image, but it could variously be inspired by several others. But it could actually be inspired by a specific version. So I picked one possible equivalent up right here at the bottom. It's more Mesoamerican, though certainly there are Andean bird imagery that's can be similar as well. And then this is a likely overall, in terms of the actual, this piece of the dam here is actually, I mean, if you want to really speculate, it could be influenced by Tlaloc again, so the rain, god of rainstorms for the Aztecs and the folks of Teotihuacan. And you can see this cross comparison with the effigy vessel from the Templo Mayor Museum in Mexico City. So no idea what this one is, but it reminds me of the way the sun is portrayed in Mesoamerican codices post-Spanish conquest. It doesn't really look like anything from pre-Columbian period per se. At least not to me. And in the revamped room, you also have just before you get to the tomb of Qualopec proper, the main chamber, you see hanging above this this swinging element that again seems to be based off of the Lambeki deity. And again, here's the Tumi knife from the museum of Fine Arts in Houston. And then in the actual tomb of Qualopec, we again have this time instead we have the Mayan glyphs or on top, and then we have or pseudo Mayan glyphs. They're kind of more stylized in this kind of simplified way. But you also have references to these figures next to the staff deity from the Gateway of the Sun at Tiwanaku, and some of them seem to be a fictional hybrid between uh, what's found at Tiwanaku, but also they're made a little bit more menacing with fangs and more like kind of moche figures. And you also see that the actual image of Qualopec in the center is just above where his body is. You see that it's inspired by this image of the Moche X or Spider Sacrificer from the Met, and this is an example from the Met Museum. And at the bottom on the staircase, you have these geometric animals. That's also inspired by imagery from the ancient city of Chan Chan, the Chimu capital. And that that's about it. Thanks, everyone. So I might go back to these, or I might go to the other games, depending on how things go. I might focus region by region first between the games, so Andean Mesoamerican stuff from Tomb Raider 1, then I might go here, and then I might go to the stuff in Tomb Raider Legend, the Bolivian and Peru sections, and then Shadow of the Tomb Raider, which also has a mix of Andean and Mesoamerican imagery and material. And then I'll go through the other regions. So I might go back to St. Francis Folly, look at the classical references there, and then move on from there. So we will see. Thanks a lot, everyone. If you're interested in these IDs, please let me know. Please subscribe. Please like and hit the notification bell button. And I will see you next time. Thanks a lot, everyone.